Hey, what's up? It's Mr. Sutta here. Today we're going to be talking about observations and inferences. So we're going to go over the basics between an observation, an inference, and then some related vocabulary about those terms. All right, let's get started. All right, so let's look at this picture first. I want to know what do you observe about the object on the scale? So let's make some observations. So I look at the scale. It's a two-pan scale. There's an apple. It's green. It's a little bit shiny. On the other side, we have a block, and the block is labeled 125 grams. Those are all observations that we can make about the picture, things that we see, hear, feel, taste, and touch. Because it's a picture, we can only see things here. Right? So an observation is really, it's gathered information that's based on our five senses. So those five senses being sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touching. Right? And importantly, observations are able to be recorded. Right? There are two types of observations. They can be either qualitative or they can be quantitative. Right? We're going to look at it a little bit more in depth as to what those terms mean, qualitative and quantitative. Right? So qualitative observations, what's the root word that you hear in there? You should hear quality. You have quality for a qualitative observation. Now, qualitative observations are described by observable characteristics, properties, or attributes. Right? So a qualitative observation can be an adjective. So for example, the apple is shiny and the apple is green. Shiny and green are qualitative observations about the apple's appearance. They're a characteristic of that apple. Now to contrast, the other type is a quantitative observation. The root word in there being quantity. Right? So quantitative observations are described by a numbered measure or a amount. For example here, the one apple has a mass of 125 grams. The quantity of the apples, the number of apples, and the mass of the apple are the quantitative observations about the apple. So we're not talking about characteristics like color, we're talking about the numbers, the amounts of things about the apple. All right, so let's look at this picture now. What are your inferences about the object on the scale using your observations? So let's review our observations really quick. So we have the apple there. It's green. It's shiny. The two pans there are balanced. And we have that block over there that says 125 grams on it. So if I were to make an inference, I could say, all right, well, that apple, it's green. It's shiny. It's probably good to eat. And on the other side, it's balanced out with the 125 gram mass. So I can know that, well, my apple has to have a mass of 125 grams because the scale balances out too. So that apple, it's green, it's shiny, it has a good weight to it, so it's probably ready to eat, right? So those are some inferences that I can make about those objects. Right? Now, an inference is an educated guess or an assumption based on one or more observations. So, for example, just to recap, the apple is ready to eat because it looks shiny and has a good weight. Both of those are inferences based off of observations that we made about the picture. Right, so let's just do some review here. So let's we're going to look at a few statements and we're going to tell whether it's an observation or if it's an inference. Right, so the first statement here, the cardinal has red feathers. Is that an observation or an inference? The cardinal has red feathers. Observation or inference? Right, if you guessed observation, you're absolutely correct. And we can take it one step further. It's got to be a qualitative observation because it's talking about a characteristic or a quality of the feathers that the cardinal has. Next one here. PJMS has 300 students that attend school to learn. Is this an observation or is it an inference? PJMS has 300 students that attend school to learn. Is it an observation or is it an inference? If you chose observation, you're definitely correct. And we can take it one step further. It's got to be a quantitative observation because it's talking about the number or the amount of something. So in this case, we're talking about 300 students, so that's a quantity. It's got to be a quantitative observation. All right, next one here. Portuguese students wear red and black clothes to school games. Is this an observation or is it an inference? So Portuguese students wear red and black clothes to school games. Observation or inference? Right? If you guessed observation, you're absolutely correct. It's got to be an observation. If you go to a football game on a Friday night, you're going to see the crowd and the fans there are going to be dressed in red and black clothes. We're not inferring anything. That's something we can observe with our senses. In this case, we're seeing that people are wearing those red and black clothing. And if we take it one step further, it's got to be a qualitative observation because it's talking about a characteristic. In this example, the colors of the clothes. All right, next one here. The cardinal can fly fast because it has wings. Is this an observation or is it an inference? The cardinal can fly fast because it has wings. Observation or inference? Right? If you guessed inference, you're absolutely correct. It's got to be an inference because we're making a guess or an assumption. So the cardinal can fly fast because it has wings. Now, if it just said the cardinal has wings, that's an observation. But because we're making an assumption or a guess based upon that observation, it's got to be an inference. So the cardinal can fly fast because it has those wings. Next one here. The cardinal is related to roosters because it chirps at 5 a.m. when the sun comes up. Is this an observation or is it an inference? The cardinal is related to roosters because it chirps at 5 a.m. when the sun comes up. Observation or inference? Right? If you guessed inference, you're correct. It has to be an inference because we're making a guess or assumption about something that we have already observed. Now, if the statement said the cardinal chirps at 5 a.m. when the sun comes up, that's an observation. That's something we could check the timing. We could write that down. We could write down how the chirp sounds. That would be an observation too. But because you're taking it one step further and you're saying, well, because the cardinal chirps at 5 a.m., it's probably got to be related to the rooster, right? And that's making an inference. You're taking it one step further, making sort of a prediction. Right, next one here. Port Jervis students have pride in their school. Is this an observation or is it an inference? Port Jervis students have pride in their school. Observation or inference? Right? It's got to be an inference here. So an observation is something that you would see or you would sense. Now, an inference is taking it one step further. So pride is not something that you can see or feel or touch, but you could witness an event that would lead you to believe that somebody has pride. So, for example, some of you took part in the cleanup at the church earlier in the beginning of the year. Now, that's an observation. I could see you participating in the cleanup at the church, and that's a good thing to do. So I could make an inference based upon that observation. Oh, if they're cleaning up around their town, they must have a lot of pride in their school and their town. So that's an inference that I can make upon an observation. All right, last one here. Port Jervis students smell like deodorant after attending gym class, or at least some of you do. Right? So Port Jervis students smell like deodorant after attending gym class. Is this an observation or is it an inference? Right? If you guessed the observation, you're absolutely correct. This is something that we could sense. So for example, here we're going to use our sense of smell, and we're going to smell deodorant. That's going to be an observation. Right? That wraps it up for observations and inferences. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.